ETE Emetap Sunny Sanet Anquas the Jet Uncle Jasanab Dua Henu for listening. Good morning. Yeah, I'm just waking up, finishing off the mango juice. Hopefully your day is going well. And it's time. It's time, as I said, this series here that we're doing, it's a nice, long, stiff, boring one. But good for learning. Good for learning because you need to know the Gardner book. It's been referred to all the time. You hear it in different arguments. We're going through every page of the Gardner series on grammar in this particular series. We'll be doing other books of the like. At this point in time, this is the grammar book we're focusing on. We'll be doing about 3 other grammar books. Plus, we'll be doing the archaeology stages. And what we're doing is hitting each section of this particular book as you get comfortable and come into the building. So you can start to understand some of these discussions that are happening around you and yours. Now I just got to find where I put the book at. And we will get into it in just a moment. Wherever I put the book. There it is, right there. Hello. So the last time we left, we finished with the preface. We read some of Gardner's thoughts. Here we'll be doing the introduction, not the whole introduction. Like I said, it'll be broken up in portions. I believe this particular part goes A, B, C, and D. And then we've got a lesson. Get your notebook. I'm going to give you a second to get your notebook and paper. Take notes. Because there's certain things that have been said already that you should have in your libido and use in case you have a discussion with anybody concerning, right? So we've done that, and these are things that you should know. I'm going to stop sharing for 2 seconds while I'm rocking out. I'm jamming over here today. I just want to turn the beat down just a tad. Yeah, I want to make sure you guys get the bulk of the information over the hot soundtrack. That hot soundtrack, man. It's the hottest beat in the country right there. Man, I am Saber Asar Mka. If you're not familiar, I'll kill you, so don't get too familiar. You don't know me, that's that nonsense, so knock it off, will you? Here we go. Let's put this out the way. So this is the introduction. Remember, this is Sir Alan Gardner's book. Just for those who just tuned in, let me take you to the beginning. We are going through Egyptian grammar, being an introduction to the study of hieroglyphs by Sir Alan Gardner. This is his 3rd revised edition. We read through the notes on the first, on this revised edition, and the notes of the first were pretty much the same, which is why we skipped over them. If anybody has the book or is downloading that PDF you see right there at the top, right here, you should do that so you have a copy of the book. And this is for your soundbite pleasure and listening that you get this here. So let me share again. Make sure. Oh, I'm already sharing. No, I'm not sharing. Stop screen share. Stop screen. No, I'm sharing. Okay, we're good. We are good to go. So here we go. Introduction: the Egyptian language. The subject of this manual is the language of the ancient Egyptians as revealed in their hieroglyphic writings. The earliest inscriptions go back as far as the First Dynasty, which can in no case be placed later than 3000 BC, while some authorities favor a date many hundreds of years earlier. And I would agree with that. When you see dates in here, it's good to know them, but for the most part, you can ignore them. We'll get into another topic of that nature at a later date. Anyway, right back here. The same script lived on far into the Christian era. The latest hieroglyphs known are at Philae and dated to AD 394. The next latest show the names of the Roman emperors Diocletian, year 12, AD 295, and Tyrannius, Decius, AD 249-251. Thus, the use of the earliest form of Egyptian writing, though at the last confined to a narrow circle of learned priests, covers a period of 3 or even 4,000 years. What they're saying is that the last date of the Egyptian writing, which is around this time here, was confined to a few priests. So it fell out of use. And then they're saying it covered about 4,000 years, etc., etc. Like I said, the dates are useless to me, in my opinion, and from what excavation shows. Anyway, in the course of so many centuries, grammar and vocabulary were bound to change very considerably. And in point of fact, the Egyptian spoken under the Roman occupation bore but little resemblance to that which was current under the oldest pharaohs. It is true that the new modes of parlance which came into existence from time to time were by no means adequately reflected in the contemporary hieroglyphic inscriptions. For in Egypt, the art of writing was always reserved to a conservative and tradition-loving caste of scribes, upon whose interests or caprice it depended how far the common speech of the people should be allowed to contaminate the Medu-Neter. So they're saying the common talk conflated with the words of God. And right here you see the Medu-Neter, the word, the God's words. We'll get into how we know this later. This will all come up later. Nonetheless, the idiom in which the public records of the 20th dynasty about 1200 1085 through 1085 BC are couched differs widely from that found, for example, in the royal decrees of the 6th dynasty about 2420 to 2294 BC. To avoid confusing the beginner's notion, it is obviously desirable that he should confine his attention to some special phase of the language, and there are many reasons which render Middle Egyptian more suitable for that purpose than any other phase. So this book focuses on Middle Egyptian. It is with Middle Egyptian, therefore, that this book will be exclusively concerned. Middle Egyptian, as here understood, is the idiom employed in the stories and other literary compositions of the Middle Kingdom, dynasties 9 through 13, roughly from 2240 to 1740 BC, as well as in the public and private monumental inscriptions of that period, and also far down into the 18th dynasty, 1573 to 1314 BC. Much later, when the scribes of the Ethiopian and Sate dynasties, the Ethiopian and Sate dynasties, about 715 to 525 BC, adopted a deliberately archaistic style of writing. It was to Middle Egyptian that they reverted. There is evidence to show that the Renaissance, which, after a certain interval of disruption followed the end of the Old Kingdom, was marked by a great development of literary activity. A florid metaphorical style now came into vogue, and a number of tales and semi-didactic treatises were written, which obtained a wide celebrity and were copied and recopied in the schools. For this reason, the period covered by Middle Egyptian may be considered the classical age of Egyptian literature. Another reason, which makes the language of the 12th dynasty particularly suited to the purpose of the novice, is that linguistically, the business documents belonging to that time differ less from the contemporary literary works than those of any other period. Middle Egyptian has further the advantage of being more consistently spelt than other phases of the language, and it is in the phase that the inflections of the verb are best displayed in the writing. Lastly, the number of Middle Egyptian texts which have been preserved is very great and comprises religious, magical, medical, mathematical, historical, and legal compositions, besides the literary works and business documents already mentioned. Affinities and characteristics of Egyptian. The Egyptian language is related not only to the Semitic tongues, Hebrew, or Arabic, Aramaic, Babylonian, etc., but also to the East African languages, Gala, Somali, etc., and the Berber idioms of North Africa. And we have a footnote, don't we? Let's read the footnote. The present state of the question is well summarized in G. Lefebvre sur l'origine de la langue égyptienne in Chronique d'Égypte, July 1936, with full bibliography. See to the same scholar's grammaire in De la Egyptian Classique. The relationship to both families is certain, but comparisons of vocabulary become the more hazardous the further they are pushed. So basically, what they're saying is that in these two books, Egyptian and Chronic Egypt, basically, and Grammar, the Egyptian Classic, which is these are in French, you're gonna find that these languages, characteristics of Egyptian match these, the African, Gala, Somali, Hebrew, Arabic, Aramaic, Babylonian, and North African Berber languages. They match up prominently, right? And for the Semitic affinities, see especially A. Ember, Egypto-Semitic Studies, Leipzig. And currently, if you're an African scholar, we're banking on you and myself, because I'm also doing the work, to come up with different cognates and relations to the African languages, so that we can show that when they say Afrocentric or whatever they call us, that it's not a matter of that. We're just showing that the culture stemmed from Africa and the languages are more relatable to that. It's why they still call Afro-Asiatic a pseudo language, because it doesn't fit as well with Semitic as it would if we use Coptic and other African languages. So it's time to make that connection. And this is just kind of pointing that out as we go through. Let's go back to the note. We were at Ember, Egypto-Semitic Studies, Leipzig, Kalis, Grundlegung der Ägypter Semitischen, that's in German. The Hamitic Zilzar Upsprung, and that's something else in German. You can see it's in Berlin. This one was wrote 1933, 1936. The comparison with the Hamitic labors under the difficulty that hardly any ancient written records exist, while that the Semitic has rendered much good service, particularly in the realms of morphology and syntax. Egyptian writing omits the vowels so that our transliterations of the hieroglyphs display only the consonantal skeleton. Basically what I just said, right? The Hamitic labors under the difficulty that hardly any Egyptian or any ancient written records exist. Africa always had an oral tradition, and so not everything is written down. Certain things were just understood because the tradition carried on from generation to generation. Because Europe, Asia, and other countries started to write everything down once we introduced them to writing, they have a more extensive affinity for how it transfers into this language compared to this one. So we can start to see cognates of words, or two words that are similar or the same in two different languages, and we can see the gradual growth in both. Where in Africa, we have to do the work now to make it simple. Let's get back to our reading. Give me just a moment. I'm going to pause this real fast. Pardon me, I got a baby on board. Let's get back to the studies. Here we go. Affinities and characteristics of Egyptian. The Egyptian language is related not only to the Semitic tongues, Hebrew, Arabic, Aramaic, Babylonian, and etc., but also to the East African languages, Gala, Somali, etc., and the Berber idioms of North Africa. Its connection with the letter groups, together known as the Hamitic family, is a very thorny subject, but the relationship to the Semitic tongues can be fairly accurately defined. Give me just one more moment. Let me get this situated here. All right, let's get back to it. In general structure, the similarity is very great. Egyptian shares the principal peculiarity of Semitic in that its word stems consist of combinations of consonants, as a rule, three in number, which are theoretically at least unchangeable. Grammatical inflection and minor variations of meaning are contrived mainly by ringing the changes on the internal vowels, though affixed endings also are used for the same purpose. More important differences of meaning are created by reduplication, whole or partial, such as sin, which means brother, sin, to be brotherly, are created by reduplication, whole or partial, right? So when you see Medu duplicated twice, you start to see this. You start to see sen, which sometimes is written as two ideographs for a brother. Sometimes it's written as the towel and the water symbol. And we'll get to that once we start to get into the lessons. Towards Shem Su, elder, later form Shem, or in one or two special cases by prefixed consonants, causatives in s, like sanek, cause to live, or sa'ank, cause to live. Nouns with the formative consonant m, like hennet, ferry boat, from hani, row. Informations like neftfet, leap away, beside fetfet, leap. There are moreover many points of contact in the vocabulary, and they give another example: heseb, to count; Arab, hasaba. Now you can see the cognate right there. E.g., ink, one; Hebrew, anaki, and it goes on and on. Hemenu, 8; Hebrew, shemene. Though these are very frequent, obscured by metathesis and by unobvious consonantal changes. Another example: sejam, to hear; Arab, samia; ib, heart; Arab, lubu; sub, be healthy; Arab, salima. Hold on one second, guys. I'll be right back. All right, we back. We back for good. We sharp. I'll be cutting this up, obviously. So we left off right here with the Arab Salima. In spite of these resemblances, Egyptian differs from all the Semitic tongues a good deal more than any one of them differs from any other, and at least until its relationship to the African languages is more closely defined. What did I tell you guys to do? What is the mission? Egyptian differs from all Semitic tongues a good deal more than any one of them differs from any other, and at least until its relationship to the African languages is more closely defined, Egyptian must certainly be classified as standing outside the Semitic group. There are grounds for thinking that it is a language which, possibly owing to a fusion of races, had, like English as compared with the other Teutonic dialects, disintegrated and developed at an abnormally rapid pace. This may be well illustrated in the case of the verb. No trace of the old Semitic imperfect has survived in Egyptian, where, moreover, the old Semitic perfect is already much restricted in its use. And it is exceedingly interesting to note that the participle formations by which these tenses have been or are being replaced Sejemeth heard of him equals he hears. Sejemineth heard of him equals he has heard. Find analogies in certain of the most recent offshoots of the Semitic family, namely the Neo-Syriac dialects. The state of affairs just described is exhibited even in the oldest known stages of Egyptian. The evidence from the noun is less illuminating, but the oldest forms which can be deductively reconstructed, such as har for face, for necher, God, show by the quantity of their vowels that the case endings of early Semitic had already vanished. Let's scoot up some. The entire vocalic system of Old Egyptian may indeed be proved to have reached a stage resembling that of Hebrew or modern Arabic as compared with classical Arabic. The free and open vocalization of the earlier times in classical Arabic, Ragulun, has given place under the influence of a strong tonic accent to a system in which all the secondary syllables are shortened down and subordinated to the one accented vowel in the ultimate or penultimate syllable. A theoretic prehistoric Netarada goddess has in historic Egyptian become Necheret, which we may infer to have been the pronunciation about the time of the pyramids. Towards the end of the Old Kingdoms, new grammatical tendencies manifest themselves. The synthetic tenses Sejemeth and Sejemineth mentioned above are first supplemented and then gradually replaced by analytic forms. Thus, Iweth, Hor Sejem, he is upon hearing, appears in Old Egyptian side by side with Sejemeth, he hears, though it does not wholly replace the latter until the Coptic period. The reason it does that is because in the Coptic period, you have added verbiage from Greek, and you also have the vowels written in it, just so you guys know. In late Egyptian, the vernacular of the 18th dynasty and after such analytic forms already predominate. In various respects, the relationship of late Egyptian to Middle Egyptian is closely parallel to the relationship of French and the other Romance languages to their common parent Latin. In the already mentioned substitution of analytic for the synthetic verb forms, he vias fere, I am going to do, as against Latin, facium, in the possession of an indefinite article derived from the word for one. And basically, you got wa, Egyptian, you've got in French. And a definitive article derived from a demonstrative adjective. Egyptian, you have pa, French, you have le, Latin, ile. So they're telling you that the language that was spoken way back in ancient Egypt is still surviving in some of these other languages that you speak today. You're seeing derivatives in your French. You're seeing derivatives in your German and in your common languages from ancient Egyptian, from the late form in particular, the Coptic. Let's keep going. In the substitution of new words for many old words signifying quite common things, as just stated, head, Middle Egyptian, was tep. Late Egyptian was jaja. Latin, caput, French, tetet, from Latin, testa. And lastly, in the fact that Middle Egyptian, like Latin, survived as the monumental and learned language long after it had perished as the language of everyday life. Let's keep going. The most striking feature of Egyptian in all its stages is its concrete realism, its preoccupation with exterior objects and occurrences to the neglect of those more subjective distinctions which play so prominent a part in modern and even in the classical languages. Subtleties of thought such as are implied in might, should, can, hardly, as well as such abstractions as cause, motive, and duty belong to a later stage of linguistic development. Possibly, they would have been repugnant to the Egyptian temperament. Despite the reputation for philosophic wisdom attributed to the Egyptians by the Greeks, no people has ever shown itself more averse from speculation or more wholeheartedly devoted to material interests. And if they paid an exaggerated attention to funerary observances, it was because the continuance of earthly pursuits and pleasures was felt to be at stake, assuredly not out of any curiosity as to why and whither of human life. I disagree with that, but okay. The place taken elsewhere by meditation and philosophic bent seems, with the Egyptians, to have been occupied by exceptional powers of observation and keenness of vision. So a lot of people, they talk about meditation, but you heard what they just said, right? The place taken elsewhere by meditation and philosophic bent seems, with the Egyptians, to have been occupied by exceptional powers of observation and keenness of vision. They always were looking at the stars and looking at the objects of nature around them. Intellectual and emotional qualities were ordinarily described by reference to the physical gestures or expressions by which they were accompanied. Thus, liberty is extension of hand, aweta. Cleverness is sharpness of face, sight, sapedhor. Another feature of Egyptian is its marked preference for static over dynamic expression. Apart from the rare survivals of the active old perfective, there is no genuine active tense, all others being derived from passive or neuter participles. No less salient a characteristic of the language is its concision. The phrases and sentences are brief and to the point. Involved constructions and lengthy periods are rare, though such are found in some legal documents. The vocabulary was very rich, though as may be inferred from our previous statements, not equally well developed in every direction. The clarity of Egyptian is much aided by a strict word order, probably due in part to the absence of case endings in the nouns. There remains to be mentioned a certain formality that is conspicuous in Egyptian writings, a rigidity, and conventionally which find their counterpart in Egyptian art. Let's read the footnotes real quick. This general verdict is not vitiated by the sporadic occurrence of text showing a real speculative or scientific interest, such as exegetic text published by Breasted under the title The Philosophy of a Memphite Priest, or the Edwin Smith Medical Papyrus edited by the same scholar. These were doubtless the creations of individuals far above the average intellectual standard. So there's kind of a slight from Gardner to say that. He's basically saying for someone to write those medical papyruses, or for the Egyptian priest, which there were several in ancient Egypt, that they were above the normal thinking patterns of regular human beings that walked around at that time. And so most people weren't on their thinking level. I believe this is an archaic statement, and we can throw that out. Gardner also says some aspects of the Egyptian language, and then he has a reference, and this was to this participle of passive or neuter. You can check some aspects of the Egyptian language in Proctor Britton Akkad, and it's the 23rd, written in 1937, if you choose to. Let's continue. We're almost done with this one here. We're almost done with this lesson. Went up too fast. Let's go. This is different stages of the language, so make sure you get your pen and pencil out so you can have these as well. Tradition discouraged originality alike in subject matter and in expression, but there are some notable exceptions. For a brief estimate of the value of Egyptian literature, see below. And now we're going to cover the different stages of the language. So let's look. Bearing in mind the fact that the written language reflects the spoken language of the different periods only to a limited extent, and that the monumental records on stone are always more conservative than business documents and letters on potsherds and papyrus, we may roughly distinguish the following linguistic stages. And then they tell you, let's read that footnote on that real quick. Die Indeling der Ägypter, Tagleshinides, whatever. It's in German. This is where they get the breakdown of the different time periods of the language. Let's look and see what they are. Old Egyptian, the language of dynasties 1 through 5, 6, 7, 8. So 1 through 8, about 3180 BC to 224 BC, 2240 BC is the time period for the Old Egyptian language. Write that down. That's a note for you. This may be taken to include the language of the pyramid text. Write that down. It's the pyramid text, which, however, displays certain peculiarities of its own and is written in a special orthography. Write that down. Special orthography written in. Otherwise, the surviving documents of this stage are mainly official or otherwise formal funerary formula and tomb inscriptions, including some big biographical texts. Old Egyptian passes with but little modification into Middle Egyptian. So that period, Old Egyptian, you write this down too. Write them down. Formal funerary formulas, tomb inscriptions, some biographical text. Little modification was done to the text. Into Middle Egyptian. Let's get into Middle Egyptian. Middle Egyptian, possibly the vernacular of the dynasties 9 through 11, about 2240 to 1990 BC. Later contaminated with new popular elements. Put that in there. In the later form, it survived for some monumental and literary purposes, right down to the Greco-Roman times, while the earlier form was retained as the religious language. So it's the religious language, Middle Egyptian, and it survived to the Greco-Roman time period, the Ptolemaic era. Write that down. Late Egyptian, the vernacular of dynasties 18 through 24, about 1573 to 715 BC, exhibited chiefly in business documents and letters. What did it say? Exhibited chiefly in business documents and letters. Write that down. But also in stories, write that down, and other literary compositions, and to some extent also in the official monuments from Dynasty 19 onwards. Write that down. Official monuments from Dynasty 19 onwards. There are but few texts, however, wherein the vernacular shows itself unmixed with the classical idiom of Middle Egyptian. So, Late Egyptian is mixed with Middle Egyptian. There's few texts that show them not being mixed together. Very few. Various foreign words make their appearance. For some other characteristics, see above pages 3 and 4. Let's go to the next stage. Demotic. This term is loosely applied to the language used in the books and documents. Write that down. Used in the books and documents. Demotic. Written in the script known as Demotic. See below 8. From dynasties 25 to late Roman times, 715 BC to AD 470. Demotic. Here again, the old classical idiom is blended with later vernacular elements, often inextricably. Here we go. The last form, Coptic. What is Coptic about? The old Egyptian language in its latest developments. Or what they said, the old Egyptian language in its latest development, as written in the Coptic script from about the 3rd century AD onwards. So called because it was spoken by the Copts, the Christian descendants of the ancient Egyptian in whose churches it is read, though not understood, even at the present day. You heard what they said. Christian descendants of the ancient Egyptians, in whose churches it is read, but is not understood, even at the present day. After the Arab conquest, AD 640, Coptic was gradually superseded by Arabic and became extinct as a spoken tongue in the 16th century. Coptic is written in the Greek alphabet, supplemented by 7 special characters derived ultimately from the hieroglyphs. So they're saying that. The dates adopted are approximately those given by Sewell, The Legacy of Egypt, Oxford, 1942. Those prior to Dynasty 12 are much disputed. The name Copt is doubtless a corruption of the Greek Aegyptos, Egypt. Let's go into the grammar a little bit. Let's touch that, and we'll stop right here at B. And then I'll chop this video up so you'll never know. I had to check on the kiddo. Egyptian grammar, namely the sh symbol. This is Coptic on the left where you see my arrow. This is the English sound. This is the hieroglyphic sha. This is the horned viper in Coptic. This is the F sound that it makes in English. This is the horned viper in hieroglyphic, making the F sound. This is the k. This is the onion, basically, right here. This is an onion. This is k. Here's the onion. Here's the sound. K. Only in the Boharic dialect, not the Sahidic. Only in the Boharic dialect. The Akhmimic, a differentiation from this, answers the same purpose for the H sound. Right here, hieroglyph, and that's either the finger or it's a part of the eye. And I can't remember at the moment with the scroll at the bottom. Here goes another Coptic. Tej. It has the DJ sound. Ja. You hear uja, ja, right there, the fire. G. And this is why I always said ancient Egyptian had clicks in it. Here in the Coptic, you've got G, like Geb. Here, you've got the basket, K, where you also see it written in older forms, Keb. And you also see Seb written for the Necha or the god Geb, god of the earth. This here, T, Coptic is here. English is here. Ancient Egyptian, you know this hand given an offering in the bread loaf. This is dit. Dit is how we say this. In Coptic, it survives as T. And so, as we close this session out, the importance of Coptic philology is due to its being the only form of Egyptian in which the vowels are regularly written. What is Coptic? What does Coptic do? It's philologically due to its being the only form of Egyptian in which the vowels are regularly written. The vowels are written in Coptic, not in the hieroglyphic, not in the hieratic, not usually in the Demotic, just in the Coptic. Just in the Coptic, right? Let's read the footnote on that. Let's go down to 1. See Appendix A at the end of the book. See Crumb's remarks. JEA. Journal of Egyptian Archaeology. We'll be reading some of that too, right? So, it must not be forgotten, however, that Coptic represents a far later stage of the language than even the most vulgar examples of late Egyptian. The vocabulary is very different from that of the older periods and includes many Greek loanwords. even such grammatical particles as yev or fev, yev, and ha. The word order is more Greek than Egyptian. To a certain extent, at least, Coptic is a semi-artificial literary language elaborated by the native Christian monks. At all events, it is extensively influenced by Greek, biblical literature. The first tentative efforts to transcribe the Old Egyptian language into Greek letters belong to the 2nd century AD and are of pagan character. Horoscopes, magical texts, and the like. Several dialects of Coptic are distinguished, of which the following are the most important. Akhmimic, the old dialect of Upper Egypt, which early gave place to Sahidic. Sahidic, less correctly written Sahidic. So it's really Sahidic, but I say Sahidic to make it easier to pronounce. Sahidic. Sahidic. The dialect of Thebes, later used for literary purposes throughout the whole of Upper Egypt. And then third, Boharic, doubtless originally the dialect of the Western Delta, only but later, after the removal of the Patriarch to Cairo in the 11th century, the literary idiom of the whole of Egypt, the Boharic. And so that's going to end this particular session. As we continue to work through through Gardner's grammar book, next time we'll be concluding. We'll be reading section B, the hieroglyphic writing, and we'll be getting into the rebus principle and other things of that nature. Just touching on some things as we go through the whole book. This video will eventually be chopped up. It'll also have an intro and all that good stuff. And there'll be less breaks in it when you look back at it after a while. But for now, if you've sat with us, remember who you are. Be in the Sar, Uncle Jasaneb, Uncle Wastejed, and we will see you soon. Imita.